Chapter 1. The uninvited guest. Elara chose the dress deliberately. It was old wool, dyed a muddy gray that made her skin look sallow in candlelight. The bodice hung loose where it should have cinched, and the hem bore stains from when she'd knelt in the garden dirt 3 summers ago, back when she still believed her father might notice her efforts. She wore it now because she wanted to disappear into the walls of their crumbling estate, to become another shadow among the peeling portraits and moth-eaten tapestries. Her father had a guest tonight. Someone important, he'd said. Someone who could save them. Elara didn't believe in saviors anymore. She descended the main staircase slowly, one hand trailing along the banister, worn smooth by generations of women who'd probably hoped for better futures than hers. The manor was quiet except for the occasional groan of settling timber and the whisper of wind through broken shutters. They'd sold most of the servants years ago, a polite way of saying they could no longer afford to pay them. Now only Mrs. Harrow remained, ancient and half-deaf, moving through the kitchen like a ghost who'd forgotten she was dead. The dining room door stood open. Candlelight spilled across the threshold, warm and golden, a lie that suggested comfort where none existed. Elara paused just outside, listening. Her father's voice carried that particular brightness he used when speaking to people he owed money. "She's a quiet girl, my lord, sensible, well-read, though I'll admit her education was informal. Her mother saw to that before she died, giving birth to a son who followed her 6 hours later. Before father started drinking. Before the debts piled up like snow in winter." Silent and suffocating. "I did not come to discuss your daughter's education, Ashford." The second voice stopped Elara mid-breath. It was low, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth. Each word emerged perfectly formed, as if the speaker weighed every syllable before releasing it into the world. There was no accent she could place, yet something in the cadence felt wrong, too measured, too controlled, like a man who'd learned to speak by studying others rather than through natural use. "Of course not, my lord. Forgive me. I only meant to suggest that she wouldn't be entirely without merit, should you, that is. If you were considering, I am considering whether your family has anything of value beyond this rotting house and its debts." Silence. Elara's fingers tightened on the doorframe. She should leave, turn around, climb back upstairs, lock herself in her room and pretend this conversation wasn't happening. Pretend her father wasn't negotiating her future with a stranger in exchange for coin, but her feet wouldn't move. She would come with a dowry. Of course, her father continued, desperation creeping into his voice now. "The land to the east, near the old mill. It's good soil, my lord, fertile. And there's the matter of her bloodline. Her mother's family traced back to Ashford." The name cracked like a whip. "Do you imagine I care about dirt or genealogy? No, my lord. I apologize. You will bring her here, now." It wasn't a request. Elara's pulse hammered against her throat. She had perhaps 3 seconds to decide, flee and confirm her cowardice, or enter and face whatever waited beyond that doorway. Neither option felt like a choice. She stepped into the light. The dining room looked worse by candlelight than it did in the honest clarity of day. The long table was set for 3, but only 2 places showed signs of use. Wine glasses stood half full, reflecting flame in their depths. The walls bore rectangular shadows where paintings once hung, sold off piece by piece to keep the creditors at bay. Her father sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with wine or shame, or both. He'd dressed in his best coat, the one with fraying cuffs. He tried to hide by keeping his hands on the table. The other man didn't sit. He stood near the window, perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back. He wore black, not the fashionable black of mourning or formal occasions, but a black so complete it seemed to drink the surrounding light. His coat was impeccably tailored, his posture rigid as a soldier's, and his face Elara's breath caught. He was beautiful the way winter was beautiful, sharp and merciless and absolutely indifferent to whether you survived the night. His features were aristocratic to the point of severity: high cheekbones, a blade of a nose, a mouth set in a line that suggested it had forgotten how to smile decades ago. His hair was dark, pulled back and tied with precision, but it was his eyes that made her steps falter. They were gray, not the warm gray of storm clouds or stone, but the flat, lightless gray of ash after fire has consumed everything that once burned. They settled on her with the weight of a physical touch, assessing and cataloging and finding her wanting in the span of a heartbeat. "Elara," her father said, rising with the unsteady grace of someone 3 glasses deep. "Come." This is Lord Seelan Vross. He's well. He's considering an arrangement that would benefit both our families. Lord Vross inclined his head a fraction of an inch. The gesture somehow felt more insulting than if he'd ignored her entirely. Miss Ashford, his voice washed over her like cold water. Up close, she could see details that distance had hidden, the unnatural pallor of his skin, as if he'd never seen sunlight. The stillness of his chest, he didn't breathe the way living things breathed, with the subtle rise and fall of unconscious rhythm. Even his blinks seemed calculated, spaced at precise intervals. Something was wrong with him. Everything was wrong with him, my lord, Alara managed, dropping into a curtsy that her worn dress made graceless. When she rose, those ash-gray eyes were still fixed on her face. Your father tells me you read, Lord Vross said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, my lord. What do you read? The question felt like a test. Alara's mind raced through acceptable answers: poetry, scripture, domestic treatises. Anything a proper young woman might claim to occupy her hours. History. Mostly, she heard herself say instead. Military campaigns. The fall of old kingdoms. How power shifts when empires collapse. Her father made a strangled sound. Lord Vross's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those dead eyes. Interest, perhaps. Or amusement at her audacity. And what have you learned from studying the death of kingdoms, Miss Ashford? Alara met his gaze directly. She was already wearing her worst dress, already being sold like livestock. What did she have left to lose? That the powerful rarely fall from external force alone, she said quietly. They destroy themselves from within through arrogance, corruption, or forgetting that those they rule are human beings with limits to their endurance. The silence that followed pressed against her ears like deep water. Then Lord Vross smiled. It was a terrible thing, that smile. It showed too many teeth, white and sharp and perfectly aligned. It reached his mouth, but went nowhere near his eyes, which remained as cold and empty as a winter grave. Interesting, he murmured. Your father failed to mention you had a spine. He turned toward Ashford, who'd gone pale. We will discuss terms. The girl stays. Before her father could respond, before Alara could protest, the window exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Chapter 2. Blood on broken glass. The figure that crashed through the window moved like smoke given form, impossibly fast, impossibly silent except for the thunder of shattering glass that preceded it. Alara's scream died in her throat as the intruder straightened, brushing splinters from shoulders clad in deep crimson. A woman. Tall and lethal, with hair the color of old copper, and eyes that burned like coals in a dying fire. Seelan. The name dripped from her lips like poison sweetened with honey. Still hiding among mortals like a coward? How the mighty have fallen. Lord Vross moved. One moment he stood by the window. The next he was between Alara and the intruder, positioned with such predatory precision that Alara stumbled backward into the table. Wine glasses toppled, red liquid spreading across white linen like blood. Serafini, his voice had lost all pretense of civility. It emerged as something ancient and cold, a voice that had commanded legions in wars Alara had only read about in crumbling texts. The Treaty of Ashen Gates forbids House Mordain from entering Ashford lands. Treaties are for houses that still have power to enforce them. Serafini circled left, her movements predatory and unhurried. Tell me, does the girl know what you are? Does she know you've brought death to her doorstep simply by standing in her pathetic little manner? Alara's father made a choking sound and collapsed back into his chair. His face had gone the gray of spoiled meat. Leave, Seelan said. Not to Serafini, to Alara. Go, now. But Alara's feet had forgotten how to move. She watched, paralyzed, as the two figures began to circle each other with the focused intensity of wolves, establishing dominance. The candlelight caught on Serafini's smile, revealing teeth that tapered to points too sharp to be human. Not human, neither of them were human. The realization crashed through Alara's mind like the intruder through the window. The pallor, the stillness, the way Seelan moved with speed that defied natural law. The teeth, vampires, they were vampires, still protecting cattle? Serafini laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. How sentimental you've become in exile. Does she know you need her, Seelan? That without mortal allies you're nothing but a lord without a house, a king without subjects. That house Vross is ash and memory? My house and yours. But something in Seelan's voice fractured at the edges. Your house is 6 loyal fools hiding in a burned-out fortress. rationing blood bags like peasants at a famine. Serafini's eyes flicked to Alara, assessing. Is this one part of your grand resurrection? A well-bred broodmare to give you mortal connections? How desperate you must be. Alara's hand found the table behind her, fingers closing around the stem of a fallen wine glass. The break had left it jagged, sharp enough to cut. Sharp enough to what? Fight a creature that moved faster than her eye could track? Take the girl and run, Seelan. Scurry back to your ruins. House Mordain has claimed this territory. Every mortal family with debts, every nobleman too proud to admit defeat, they all belong to us now. Including the Ashfords. The Ashfords are under my protection. Serafini's smile widened. Then protect them. She struck. Alara saw only a blur of crimson before Seelan intercepted, catching Serafini's wrist inches from his throat. They grappled with inhuman strength, moving too fast for Alara to follow, crashing through furniture that splintered like kindling under their force. Her father's strangled prayers mixed with the sound of breaking wood and snarling that wasn't quite human. Then Serafini broke free, spinning toward Alara with focused intent. Let's see what you'll sacrifice for your pet mortal. Seelan. Alara didn't think. She drove the broken wine glass forward with both hands, aiming for where she thought Serafini's chest might be. The makeshift weapon caught the vampire in the shoulder instead, glass piercing through fabric and flesh with surprising ease. Serafini hissed, stumbling back. Black blood welled around the wound, viscous and wrong, for one suspended heartbeat. Everything stopped. Then Serafini's hand shot out, catching Alara by the throat and lifting her from the ground with terrifying ease. Alara's vision immediately began to darken at the edges, her lungs screaming for air that wouldn't come. Stupid girl, Serafini breathed. Mortals who draw vampire blood forfeit their Seelan hit her like a battering ram. They went down in a tangle of limbs and fury, and Alara collapsed to her knees, gasping. Through streaming eyes she saw them truly fight with a violence that belonged in old songs about ancient wars. They moved through the room like a storm, destroying everything they touched. Chairs exploded into splinters. The table cracked in half. Picture frames shattered against walls, and the blood black and red mixing on the floor in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost ritual. Alara, her father's voice, cracked with terror. The door. Run. But where could she run that these creatures couldn't follow? Seelan had Serafini pinned now, one hand locked around her throat, the other raised with fingers bent into claws. You violated treaty law. You attacked a mortal under formal protection. House Mordain will answer for this. House Mordain doesn't answer to exiles, Serafini choked out. But her eyes had lost their mocking light. Fear flickered there now, genuine and cold. Kill me and start a war you cannot win. I don't need to kill you. Seelan's voice dropped to something below, a whisper, something Alara felt more than heard. I only need to send a message. Tell Constantine that the old laws still bind. Tell him House Ross remembers every slight. Tell him. He leaned closer, speaking words in a language that made Alara's teeth ache and her vision swim. Then he released her. Serafini scrambled backward, black blood streaming from her shoulder, her eyes wide with something beyond fear. She glanced once at Alara, a look of pure calculation, before she turned and launched herself through the broken window, disappearing into the night with impossible speed. Silence crashed down like a falling building. Seelan stood in the center of the destroyed dining room, breathing hard despite not needing to breathe. His immaculate black coat, torn and stained with both types of blood. When he turned to face Alara, his eyes had changed. They weren't gray anymore. They burned with a crimson light that pulsed in time with a heartbeat that wasn't his own. You're hurt, Alara heard herself say. Absurd given everything, but she could see the deep gash across his ribs where Serafini's claws had torn through fabric and flesh. Seelan looked down at the wound as if noticing it for the first time. It will heal. You're vampires. Yes. And she House Mordain, they're hunting you? Yes. Why? Seelan's eyes found hers. The red light was fading, replaced by that cold gray she'd first seen. Because I took something from them. Because I refused to kneel. Because power abhors a vacuum, and House Ross has been wounded. He paused. And now, because you've drawn vampire blood, you're marked. Serafini will report this. House Mordain will claim you violated their member under guest right, but she attacked. Truth matters less than law in the night courts. And the law is clear. A mortal who sheds vampire blood without house sanction faces execution. He moved toward her, glass crunching under his boots. You have two choices, Miss Ashford. Come with me now, accept my house's protection, and survive. or stay here and wait for Mordane's soldiers to collect you for trial. Elara looked at her father, still collapsed in his chair, his face slack with shock. She looked at the destroyed room, at the blood on the floor, at the broken window opening onto darkness. She looked at Lord Seelan Ross, this beautiful, terrifying creature who'd just killed to protect her. If I come with you, she said quietly, what happens to my father? Something flickered across Seelan's face, surprise perhaps, or respect. He'll be spared. House Ross will pay his debts and place him under protection. He'll live out his natural life in peace. And me? You'll survive. Beyond that, I cannot promise. Elara stood, her legs shaking but holding. She still gripped the broken wine glass, her palm slick with her own blood where the edge had cut her. Then I'll come. Chapter 3. The hollow fortress. They traveled through the night in a carriage that appeared from nowhere, pulled by horses too silent to be living. Elara sat across from Seelan, her ruined dress still damp with wine and blood, both colors indistinguishable in the darkness. She'd been allowed 5 minutes to gather belongings, a change of clothes, her mother's wedding ring, 3 books she couldn't bear to leave behind. Her father hadn't risen from his chair to say goodbye. Seelan sat motionless as carved marble, his eyes fixed on something beyond the window. The wound across his ribs had stopped bleeding, but he hadn't changed his torn coat. In the cramped space, Elara could smell copper and something else, something cold and faintly sweet, like winter flowers left too long in a vase. How long have you been? She trailed off, unsure how to finish the question. Dead? His lips curved without humor. 342 years. I was 28 when I was turned. A soldier in a war nobody remembers, fighting for a king whose name is dust. 300 years. The number was incomprehensible. Elara had lived barely 22 years, and already felt exhausted by existence, and House Ross was once the most powerful house in the Eastern Territories. We kept the peace between mortal and immortal, enforced the blood laws, prevented the kind of chaos that leads to pitchforks and fire. He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Until 7 years ago, when House Mordane decided peace was less profitable than war, the carriage hit a rut, throwing Elara against the side. Seelan's hand shot out, steadying her with impossible speed and surprising gentleness. His fingers were cold through her sleeve. Thank you, she murmured. He withdrew immediately, returning his hand to his lap with deliberate precision. You should try to sleep. We have hours yet before we reach the fortress. I don't think I can sleep after. She gestured vaguely, encompassing the entire nightmare of the evening. After discovering monsters are real, something almost like sympathy crossed his features. Most mortals scream, or faint, or both. You stabbed a vampire and negotiated terms. That argues for either remarkable courage or remarkable foolishness, perhaps both, perhaps. He fell silent again, but this time the quiet felt less hostile. Why did you ask about your father? You could have run, left him to face the consequences of his debts and his dealings. Elara looked down at her hands. The cut on her palm had stopped bleeding, leaving a thin red line across her lifeline. Because he's all I have left. And because even terrible fathers deserve better than being torn apart by creatures from nightmare. We're not creatures from nightmare. Seelan's voice hardened. We're people who died and came back wrong. We feel, we think, we love and grieve and rage like any mortal. We simply do it in the dark, over centuries instead of decades. The passion in his words startled her. This was the first real emotion she'd heard from him, the first crack in that perfect, controlled facade. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean yes, you did. And you're right to be frightened. What Serafini said was true. I am using you. Your family's bloodline, your land, your connections to other mortal families with debts. I need allies, and I'm desperate enough to purchase them through marriage contracts and protection agreements. He met her eyes. I won't lie to you about that. The honesty was somehow more unsettling than deception would have been. Elara pulled her thin shawl tighter, though the cold, she felt, had nothing to do with temperature. What happened 7 years ago? Seelan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, betrayal. My own blood. My brother Victor made a pact with House Mordane, opened our fortress to their soldiers during daylight hours when we were vulnerable. When we sleep, Miss Ashford, we die. Truly die. We cannot wake, cannot fight, cannot even sense danger. Victor led them to our day chambers and watched as they slaughtered us in our sleep. Elara's breath caught. Your brother killed your entire house? Not entire. 6 of us survived. 6 out of 43. His jaw tightened. We've spent 7 years in hiding, trying to rebuild, trying to find mortals willing to ally with the losing side. Your father's desperation made him receptive to my offer. What was your offer? Money for his debts, protection from other houses, and a marriage contract between you and one of my remaining lords, a connection that would give House Ross legitimacy in mortal society again. He paused. That was before Serafini violated treaty law, before you drew blood defending yourself. The situation has changed. The carriage began to slow. Through the window, Alara could see the first gray hints of approaching dawn touching the horizon. Changed how? House Mordain will demand your life as recompense. The Night Court will convene to judge your case. And he stopped himself, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. And you? Alara prompted. I will have to claim you as House Ross's property. A blood servant. It's the only legal protection that supersedes Mordain's claim. The words settled over Alara like ice water. A servant. In name only. You would live under my protection, within my household, subject to house law rather than mortal law. You would be safe. His eyes found hers. But you would also be bound. No leaving without permission. No contact with the mortal world except through approved channels. Your life would become very small, smaller than it already was. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. I was being sold tonight anyway, my lord. At least this way I understand the terms. The carriage stopped completely. Seelan rose with fluid grace, though he had to stoop in the confined space. We've arrived. Stay close to me. My people are suspicious of mortals. Don't touch anything. Don't wander. And whatever you do, don't invite anyone to feed from you. I wouldn't. Hunger makes people say things they don't mean. Remember that. He opened the carriage door, and cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and old stone. Alara gathered her skirts and stepped down, her boots crunching on gravel. The fortress rose before them like a broken tooth against the lightening sky. It had been grand once, she could see that in the soaring arches and elegant stonework. But fire had blackened the eastern wing, and the western tower had collapsed into rubble. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets. Sections of wall had crumbled, revealing hollow chambers within. This was House Ross. This was what remained of power and glory. 5 figures emerged from the main entrance, moving with that same predatory grace Seelan possessed. They wore dark clothing, practical and worn, and their eyes reflected the torchlight like animals' eyes caught in lamplight. The one in front, a woman with silver-streaked black hair and a scarred face, stopped 3 paces away. Her gaze raked over Alara with open hostility. You brought a mortal here? Have you lost your mind, Seelan? She drew blood against Serafini of House Mordain. She's marked for execution. The woman's expression shifted from hostility to shock. Then why in all the hells did you bring her here? Because I'm claiming her as blood servant under the Covenant of Sanctuary. Effective immediately. Silence. The other 4 vampires exchanged glances, their faces ranging from confusion to outrage. You can't, the scarred woman said flatly. The last time House Ross took a blood servant was over a century ago. The protocols alone will be followed. Exactly. Seelan's voice carried absolute authority. Bring the binding kit to the hall. We do this before full dawn. Seelan, that's a command, Isla. Not a request. The woman Isla stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned on her heel and stalked back into the fortress, the others following. Seelan offered Alara his arm. Last chance to run, Miss Ashford. Once we begin the binding, there's no going back. Alara looked at the ruined fortress, at this dangerous creature, offering her his arm like a gentleman at a ball. She thought of her father's empty house, of Serafini's burning eyes, of the cold certainty that her old life was already ashes. She took his arm. Then let's not waste time. Chapter 4. Blood and Bargains. The hall. Seelan led her to had survived the fire better than the rest of the fortress. High ceilings arched overhead, carved with symbols Alara didn't recognize, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when she looked at them directly. Candles burned in iron sconces, their flames unnaturally still, despite the drafts whistling through cracked walls. The 6 vampires of House Ross waited in a semicircle. Alara could feel their eyes on her, assessing, calculating. She kept her chin up, her hand steady on Seelan's arm, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Isla stood at the center, holding a wooden box inlaid with silver. Her scarred face remained impassive, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the wood. The binding kit, she said flatly. Though I still think this is madness. Your objection is noted. Seelan released Alar's arm and stepped forward. The rest of you witness this. What happens here is legal and binding under the Covenant of Sanctuary, enacted in the year 1247 by the Knight Council. Miss Alara Ashford will become blood servant to House Ross, under my direct protection. Any house that harms her commits an act of war against us. A young man with auburn hair laughed bitterly. War? What war can 6 vampires fight against Mordane's legions? The kind that makes them bleed for every inch, Marcus. Seelan's voice could have cut glass. Now be silent or leave. Marcus subsided, but his eyes remained hostile. Isla opened the box. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a silver knife with a handle wrapped in leather, a crystal vial filled with dark liquid, and a length of red silk cord. She lifted each item with careful reverence, laying them on a small table someone had dragged to the center of the circle. Miss Ashford, Isla's voice was cold and formal. Do you understand what you're agreeing to? A blood servant bond isn't servitude in the mortal sense. It's a chain forged in blood and magic. You'll feel Seelan's presence always. His emotions will bleed into yours. His hunger will wake you in the night. And if he dies, the bond will tear pieces from your soul on its way out. Alara swallowed hard. And in exchange, you live. House Mordane cannot touch you without violating ancient law, even they won't break lightly. Isla's eyes narrowed. But you'll also never be fully mortal again. The bond changes people, makes them other. Isla, Seelan warned, she deserves to know. Isla turned back to Alara. Some blood servants go mad from the connection. Some become addicted to their master's bite. Some lose themselves entirely, becoming extensions of the vampire they serve. It's rare, but it happens. The candles flickered. Alara could feel the weight of 6 immortal gazes pressing down on her. Run, her instincts screamed. Run now, while you still can. But where? Back to her father's crumbling house, to wait for Mordane's soldiers? Into the woods, to die of cold, or wolves, or worse. I understand the risks, Alara said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I accept them. Seelan moved to stand before her. This close, she could see faint lines around his eyes, the only hint that he'd once been human, once aged, once laughed enough to earn those marks. I need your explicit consent. The bond won't take without it. You have it. Say the words, Miss Ashford. For the record. Alara took a breath. I, Alara Ashford, freely consent to the blood servant bond with Lord Seelan Ross of House Ross. Something shifted in the air, a pressure, a waiting. Magic? Alara realized. Real magic. Watching and listening. Seelan picked up the silver knife. This will hurt. I apologize in advance. He moved before she could brace herself, the blade slicing across his palm in one smooth motion. Black blood welled up, viscous and gleaming in the candlelight. He held his hand over the crystal vial, letting exactly 3 drops fall into the dark liquid already inside. Then he offered her the knife, handle first. Alara's hand trembled as she took it. The blade was heavier than it looked, perfectly balanced. She pressed it against her own palm, hesitated. Quickly is better, Seelan said quietly. She cut. Pain lanced up her arm, bright and sharp, and red blood spilled over her fingers. Seelan caught her wrist gently, guiding her hand over the vial. 3 drops, 4, 5. He lifted her hand away, wrapping it quickly in a strip of clean linen that appeared from his coat pocket. The pressure of his fingers was careful, almost tender. Isla lifted the vial, swirling it gently. The blood mixed, red and black, spiraling together like oil and water trying to combine. Then, slowly, impossibly, the colors merged into something new, deep purple, almost black, shot through with threads of crimson. It's accepting, Isla murmured, surprise coloring her tone. The bond is willing. She poured the contents into a silver cup and offered it to Seelan. He drank half without hesitation, his throat working. Then he passed the cup to Alara. All of it, he said. Don't stop until it's gone. The cup was warm in her hands. Alara could smell copper and something darker, earthier. Every instinct rebelled against putting it to her lips. Trust me, Seelan said, and there was something in his voice, a plea almost. As if her trust mattered to him beyond the practical necessity of the moment. Alara drank. The liquid was thick and bitter, coating her tongue and throat. She forced herself to swallow, to keep swallowing, fighting the urge to gag. Heat spread through her chest, then her limbs, then her entire body. The world tilted sideways. Seelan caught her before she fell. She could feel him. Not just his arms supporting her weight, but his presence, vast and cold and ancient, pressing against her consciousness like a hand against glass. For one terrifying moment, she thought she might shatter under the pressure. Then the sensation shifted, softened, became less invasion and more connection, a thread of awareness linking her to him, humming with life that wasn't quite alive. Breathe, Celine murmured against her hair. Just breathe through it. The first moments are always the worst, Alara gasped, her fingers clutching his torn coat. She could feel his heartbeat. No, not his heartbeat, because he didn't have one. But something pulsed in him, slow and steady, and she could feel it echoing in her own chest. What is that? The bond. You're feeling what I feel. It will fade to background noise eventually, but right now it's new, overwhelming. His arms tightened fractionally. I'm sorry. I should have warned you better. Gradually, the world stopped spinning. Alara became aware of other sensations, the cold stone beneath her feet, the warmth of Celine's body. He wasn't cold, she realized with surprise. Not when held this close. The watching eyes of the other vampires. She pulled back carefully. Celine released her immediately, though his hands hovered near her elbows, ready to catch her again if needed. It's done, Isla said. She was binding the red silk cord around both their wrists. When had she done that? Alara couldn't remember. The bond is sealed. Miss Ashford is blood servant to House Ross. Let any who challenge this answer to the covenant. The other vampires echoed in unison. Let them answer. The cord fell away, but Alara could still feel it, invisible threads connecting her to Celine, binding them together in ways she didn't yet understand. Welcome to House Ross, Marcus said sorely. Try not to die. We can't afford the paperwork. Marcus, a tall woman with white blonde hair, stepped forward, ignoring his scowl. I'm Thorn. I'll show you to your quarters. Dawn is minutes away. We need to get below. Below? Alara's voice came out rough. The day chambers. Underground, where sunlight can't reach. Thorn's smile was brief and surprisingly genuine. You'll stay in the mortal wing. It's drafty and half the furniture is damaged, but at least you'll have windows and natural light. We can't offer you much luxury, but we can offer you safety. Celine was already moving toward a doorway half hidden behind a tapestry. The other vampires followed, their movements growing urgent as the sky beyond the windows shifted from black to deep blue. Go with Thorn, Celine said, without looking back. Rest. We'll speak after nightfall. Then he was gone, disappearing into darkness with the others. Alara stood alone in the hall with Thorn, the bond humming quietly in her chest, connecting her to a creature she barely knew, in a fortress full of the dead, hunted by enemies she couldn't fight. Come on, Thorn said gently. You look about ready to collapse. Alara followed, because what else could she do? Through the bond, faint and distant, she felt Celine descend into death's sleep, and the sudden absence of his presence felt like falling. Chapter 5. The weight of silence. The mortal wing occupied the northwest corner of the fortress, farthest from the fire damage. Thorn led Alara through corridors lined with portraits whose eyes had been carefully scratched out, some act of violence or superstition from years past. Their footsteps echoed against stone that had witnessed centuries of life and death and the strange space between. Here, Thorn said, pushing open a heavy wooden door. It's not much, but it's yours. The room was larger than Alara's chamber at home had been. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, its curtains faded but clean. A washstand stood near the window, beside a wardrobe that listed slightly to one side. Someone had laid a fire in the hearth, though it had burned down to coals. There's water in the pitcher, Thorn continued. Cold, I'm afraid. The heating system hasn't worked properly since the attack. We've left clothes in the wardrobe, nothing fancy, but they should fit well enough. One of the servants who died was about your size. The casual mention of death made Alara's stomach clench. Thank you. Thorn lingered in the doorway, her pale eyes assessing. You handled the binding better than most. Some mortals scream through the whole thing. I'm very good at not screaming. A flicker of something respect, perhaps, crossed Thorn's face. The bond will feel strange for a few days, like someone's watching over your shoulder, or whispering just below your hearing. It settles eventually, becomes part of your baseline. She paused. Celine is a good master, as these things go. He won't abuse the connection, won't use it to control you or invade your thoughts. Not all vampires are so principled. You sound like you know from experience. I was bound once. A long time ago, before House Ross took me in. Thorn's expression went distant. My master wasn't kind. When he died in the attack, the bond breaking nearly killed me. I was mortal then. Seelan turned me to save my life, or what passed for life after that kind of trauma. Alara sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. How do you stand it? The bond? The drinking blood? The endless night? You adapt. Or you don't, and you go mad, and eventually someone puts you down for mercy. Thorn's bluntness was almost refreshing after Seelan's careful evasions. But you seem strong, practical. Those qualities matter more than you'd think in this world. I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. Good. Fear keeps you careful. Careful keeps you alive. Thorn moved to the window, checking the shutters. These latch from the inside. Keep them closed during the day. Mordain has mortal servants who could climb the walls. At night, you can open them if you want fresh air, but stay away from the eastern wing. There's unstable flooring, and the last thing we need is a blood servant falling to her death and invalidating the bond. The practicality of it was almost worse than the danger. Does that happen often? Blood servants dying? Often enough that we have protocols. Thorn turned back, her expression softening slightly. Listen, I know this is overwhelming. Everything's happened too fast, and you're probably questioning every choice that led you here. But you're safe now, safer than you were anyway. House Ross might be diminished, but we protect our own. That includes you now. Alara wanted to believe her, wanted to find comfort in those words, but the bond hummed in her chest. A constant reminder of the creature sleeping somewhere below her feet, dead until nightfall. Vulnerable in ways she still didn't fully understand. What happens if Mordain attacks during the day? The question escaped before she could stop it. Thorn's jaw tightened. Then you run. There's a tunnel system beneath the fortress, old smugglers' routes from when this place was a border keep. Isla knows every exit. If daylight attackers breach the walls, you find her and you run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to wake us. We're already dead during day sleep. Nothing you do will change that. The horror of it settled over Alara like a shroud. To be so powerful at night, so utterly helpless during the day. To trust your life to mortals who might betray you for coin or fear, or simple survival instinct. Why did Seelan's brother do it? The question came out as a whisper. Why betray his own house? Power. Victor wanted to rule House Ross, but he was fourth in line. Seelan was the firstborn, the heir. Victor spent decades in his shadow, watching Seelan make decisions, enforce laws, command respect that Victor thought should have been his. Thorn's voice went cold. So he made a deal with House Mordain. They promised him lordship over the eastern territories if he delivered House Ross. He opened our doors during day sleep, led their soldiers to our chambers with a list of who slept where. That's monstrous. That's family. Thorn's smile was bitter. Never assume blood means loyalty, Miss Ashford. Among immortals or mortals, a sudden wave of exhaustion crashed over Alara, not physical tiredness, but something deeper. An emotional weight that made her bones feel heavy. Through the bond, she could sense Seelan's death sleep, and the absence of him felt like a wound. You should rest, Thorn said, noting her expression. The bond pulls at you when your master sleeps. It's trying to follow him down into darkness. Fight it for now. Sleep naturally if you can. It gets easier. And if I can't sleep, then you sit with the discomfort until nightfall. Read something. Explore the safe parts of the fortress. Just don't leave the grounds. Mordain will have watchers in the woods. Thorn moved to the door. I'll be in the library if you need anything. 3rd floor, west corridor. Look for the room with books stacked to the ceiling. Thorn? Alara called as the vampire reached the threshold. Why did Seelan really bind me? Not the legal reasons, the real reason. Thorn studied her for a long moment. Because you remind him of what he's fighting for. Most mortals he encounters are either corrupt nobles like your father, or terrified peasants who'd burn us given half a chance. But you looked at a vampire and saw a person. You asked about his brother instead of his fangs. You negotiated instead of begged. She smiled faintly. Seelan has spent 7 years surrounded by the dead and dying. I think you reminded him what it's like to meet someone brave. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Alara sat in the silence, feeling the bond pulse in her chest like a second heartbeat. She rose and moved to the window, opening the shutters just enough to see outside. Dawn had fully broken, painting the ruined courtyard in shades of gray and gold. Frost glittered on broken stones. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang. Below her feet, 6 vampires slept the sleep of the dead. And somewhere beyond the walls, House, Mordain plotted their next move. Alara touched her bandaged palm, where she'd cut herself for the binding. The wound throbbed in time with the bond. She was part of this now. Part of House Ross, part of their war, part of their survival. The question was whether she'd live long enough to regret it. She closed the shutters, latched them carefully, and finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed. Sleep came slowly, pulled down by exhaustion and the strange, aching absence of Seelan's presence. When she dreamed of ash-gray eyes and blood on broken glass, and a voice asking her what she'd learned from the death of kingdoms. Chapter 6. Threads of truth. Alara woke to darkness and the certainty that she was no longer alone. She sat up slowly, her heart pounding, eyes adjusting to the dim light from the dying fire. A figure stood by the window, tall, still, outlined by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through cracks in the shutters. "I apologize for startling you," Seelan's voice came from the shadows. "I wanted to check on you. The first day after binding can be difficult." Alara pulled the blanket around her shoulders, suddenly aware she was still wearing her ruined dress. "What time is it?" 3 hours past sunset. "You slept through the evening." He moved slightly, and the firelight caught his face. He'd changed clothes, dark trousers and a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Without the formal coat, he looked younger, almost human. "How do you feel?" "Strange." Alara swung her legs off the bed, bare feet touching cold stone. "Like there's an echo in my chest that isn't mine. That's the bond. You're feeling my presence." He moved to the hearth, adding wood to the coals with practiced efficiency. Flames caught and grew, casting warmth and light. "It will become less intrusive with time. Your mind will learn to filter it, the way you filter out the sound of your own breathing. And you? Do you feel me?" Seelan paused, his back to her. "Yes, though the connection is different for the vampire. Less invasive. I sense your general state: fear, calm, pain. Strong emotions come through clearly, but your thoughts remain your own. I promise you that." There was something careful in his tone, as if he'd had this conversation before and knew how badly it could go. Alara drew the blanket tighter, studying his profile in the firelight. "Thorn told me you were a soldier." "Before. I was many things before." He straightened, turning to face her. "A soldier, yes. Also a son, a brother, a fool who believed immortality was a gift rather than a curse. Do you regret it?" "Being turned?" "Every single day." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. "But regret doesn't unmake choices. It only teaches you to make different ones going forward." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of flames. Alara noticed details she'd missed before: the way Seelan held himself with military precision, shoulders back, spine straight. The careful distance he maintained, as if afraid to come too close. The faint lines of tension around his eyes. "You're in pain," she said suddenly. "I can feel it." Through the bond. His expression shuddered. "It's nothing. A lingering effect from the fight with Serafini. It will heal." "You're lying." She didn't know how she knew, only that the bond carried the truth beneath his words. "Show me." "Miss Ashford." "Alara, if we're bound by blood and magic, you can use my given name." She stood, crossing the space between them. "Show me the wound." For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then, with visible reluctance, he lifted his shirt. The gash across his ribs had healed, but wrong. Black lines spiderwebbed from the wound, spreading under his pale skin like cracks in porcelain. The flesh around it looked gray, almost necrotic. Alara's breath caught. "What did she do to you?" "Serafini coats her claws in iron shavings mixed with ash from burned vampire bones. It prevents clean healing." He lowered the shirt, but not before Alara saw him wince. "It will eventually work its way out, but until then, it hurts." "Yes, can anything help?" "Time, rest, blood." He moved away from her, putting the hearth between them. "Which I have plenty of. Don't concern yourself." But Alara could feel the pain through the bond, now that she knew to look for it: a constant, grinding ache that he'd been carrying since the fight. Hours of it. And he'd come to check on her, despite his own suffering. "The blood you drink," she said carefully. "Does it have to be human?" His eyes snapped to hers, sharp with sudden wariness. "No, animal blood sustains us, though it's less effective. We keep stores of both." "Why?" "Because you need to heal, and I'm your blood servant." "Isn't that what the bond is for?" "Absolutely not." The words came out hard, almost angry. "That's not why I bound you. I need you alive and whole, not weakened by feeding. We have supplies that you're rationing." Thorne mentioned it. 6 vampires trying to survive on limited resources, hiding in a ruined fortress. Alara lifted her chin. If my blood can help you heal faster, why wouldn't I offer it? Because I won't use you that way. Seelan's voice dropped to something dangerous. Do you understand what you're suggesting? Feeding is intimate, invasive. It creates dependencies that destroy people. I've seen blood servants become addicted to the bite, craving it more than food or water or human touch. I will not do that to you. Then teach me how to do it safely. There is no safe way, liar. Alara stepped around the hearth, closing the distance again. Through the bond, she could feel his conflict, hunger warring with honor, need fighting against principle. You're in pain. I can help. Why is that so impossible for you to accept? Because everyone I've ever taken blood from has suffered for it. The words exploded from him, raw and bitter. My wife, 300 years ago I turned her to save her life, and she went mad from the bond. Killed herself 50 years later. My lieutenant, who served House Vross for a century, became so addicted to my bite that he wasted away, refusing all sustenance except what he drew from my veins. I will not add you to that list of failures. The confession hung between them like smoke. Alara's anger drained away, replaced by something gentler. I'm not your wife. I'm not your lieutenant. She touched her bandaged palm, where she'd cut herself for the binding. I'm a woman who understands bargains and costs, who knows that survival sometimes requires uncomfortable choices. You gave me protection when I had none. Let me give you what you need in return. Seelan stared at her, his expression a war between hunger and horror. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. Explain it. Let me make an informed choice, the way you let me choose the binding. He closed his eyes, and Alara felt the moment he surrendered through the bond a loosening. A giving in. It hurts at first, he said quietly. The bite, like a knife puncturing skin. But then the venom enters your bloodstream, and the pain transforms into something else. Pleasure, euphoria. Some describe it as the most intense sensation they've ever experienced. And that's the danger, not the taking of blood, but the giving. People chase that feeling, beg for it, destroy themselves for one more taste. And if I promise not to beg? His laugh was hollow. Everyone promises that. At first, Alara extended her wrist, the one not bandaged. Then let's make a different bargain. Once, just this once, to help you heal. If I show signs of craving it afterward, we never do it again. But right now, you're hurt, and I'm offering help freely. Please? Through the bond, she felt his resistance crumbling, felt his hunger not for blood specifically, but for connection. For someone who saw his pain and chose to ease it without being compelled. Slowly, carefully, Seelan took her wrist in both hands. His skin was cool against hers, his touch impossibly gentle for someone so dangerous. Are you certain? His voice was barely a whisper. Yes. He pulled her closer, until she stood between his knees. His eyes met hers one last time, asking permission. Alara nodded. He bent his head, lips brushing the inside of her wrist where her pulse beat strongest. She felt his breath unnecessary, just another human habit he'd retained, and then the sharp, bright pain of fangs piercing skin. The world went white. Chapter 7. The taste of trust. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate, stealing Alara's breath. Then the venom hit. Heat cascaded through her veins like liquid fire, transforming agony into something she had no words for. Her knees buckled, but Seelan's arm wrapped around her waist, holding her steady as he drank. The sensation was overwhelming, not just pleasure, though that rolled through her in waves that made her gasp, but connection. The bond between them exploded into clarity, no longer a quiet hum, but a living thing, brilliant and burning. She could feel him. Not just his presence, but his essence. 3 centuries of loneliness and duty and grief, the weight of watching everyone he'd ever loved turn to dust or madness. The shame of surviving when his house fell. The desperate, clawing need to rebuild, to matter, to prove that House Vross was more than ashes and memory. And underneath it all, hunger. Not for her blood specifically, but for this connection, intimacy, the simple act of being close to another living being without walls or distance or careful control. Too much, Alara thought distantly. This is too much to feel. Seelan pulled back abruptly, his fangs retracting. Blood smeared his lips, and his eyes had gone completely crimson, burning with inhuman light. He released her wrist as if it had scorched him, stumbling backward until he hit the wall. I'm sorry. His voice came out rough, shaking. I took too much. I felt you through the bond, and I should have stopped sooner. You didn't take too much. Alara sank onto the bed, her legs still trembling. The euphoria was fading, leaving behind a pleasant warmth and bone-deep exhaustion. She looked at her wrist. 2 small puncture marks, welled with blood, already beginning to close. How do you feel? Seelan pressed his palms against the stone wall behind him, as if he needed the solid surface to remember where he was. Better. The wound is healing properly now. The iron and ash are being pushed out. He wouldn't look at her. But that's irrelevant. I hurt you. You warned me it would hurt at first. And the rest of it? The venom, the bond flaring open like that. He finally met her eyes, and she could see genuine fear there. Did you feel me? What I was thinking, feeling? Yes. Then you understand why this can't happen again. That kind of intimacy is dangerous. It breaks down boundaries, makes people forget where they end and the other begins. His hands curled into fists. I've seen it destroy mortals and vampires alike. The bond is meant to be background connection, not that. Alara touched her wrist, feeling the skin already knitting closed. The puncture marks would probably disappear by morning. What did you feel from me? The question clearly caught him off guard. What? The bond opened for both of us. You felt my emotions. What were they? Seelan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Fear at first, then curiosity, then trust, and something that felt like pity, which I absolutely don't deserve. It wasn't pity. Alara pulled the blanket around her shoulders again, suddenly cold despite the fire. It was empathy. There's a difference. Is there? He pushed away from the wall, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. You felt 300 years of self-hatred and desperation in the span of seconds. That's not something anyone should have to experience. Certainly not someone who's already been through what you have. What I've been through. Alara echoed. You mean having a father who gambled away our future? Living in a dying house? Those are mortal problems, Seelan. Ordinary suffering. Nothing compared to watching your entire family slaughtered by your own brother. Don't romanticize my pain. The sharpness in his voice surprised her. Yes, I've suffered. But I've also inflicted suffering. I've killed, fed on innocence when I was newly turned and had no control, enforced laws that destroyed families to maintain peace. I'm not some tragic hero from your history books. I'm a monster trying very hard to be slightly less monstrous. Then why bind me? Alara stood, facing him across the firelit space. If you're such a monster, why protect me? Why negotiate with my worthless father instead of just taking what you needed? Why check on me after the binding? Why warn me about the dangers? Why pull away when you could have kept drinking? Because monsters can still have principles? No, she stepped closer. Monsters don't have principles. They have appetites. You're not a monster, Seelan. You're just someone trying to survive impossible circumstances while carrying more guilt than any one person should bear. He stared at her, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his features before he locked it down. You don't know me well enough to make that judgment. Then let me know you. Stop hiding behind this cold lord facade and let me see the person underneath. Alara gestured at the space between them. The bond is going to show me eventually anyway. Why not control the narrative? Because he cut himself off, jaw tight. Through the bond, Alara felt his conflict, the desire to trust, warring with centuries of betrayal and loss. Because Victor seemed trustworthy too, she finished quietly. Your own brother. If you couldn't trust him, how can you trust anyone? The accuracy of her guess made him flinch. You're too perceptive for your own good. It's a gift. She managed a tired smile. Or a curse. I haven't decided which yet. Despite everything, Seelan's lips twitched. Almost a smile. Both probably. The tension in the room shifted, softening. Seelan moved to the chair by the fire, sinking into it with a weariness that looked wrong on someone immortal. Alara returned to the bed, tucking her feet under her. Tell me about the blood laws, she said. If I'm part of this world now, I should understand the rules. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. The blood laws were established by the Night Council in 1247, after decades of vampire mortal wars nearly destroyed both populations. The core principle is consent. Vampires cannot feed on mortals without explicit permission. Those who do are hunted and executed by house enforcers, and the houses enforce this. We did. House Vross was responsible for the Eastern Territories. We investigated violations, held trials, carried out sentences. It made us powerful, but also hated vampires, resented our authority. Mortals feared our presence. He stared into the flames. When we fell, that enforcement structure collapsed. House Mordain claims to have taken over our duties, but they're corrupt. They use the blood laws to consolidate power rather than protect people. How? By claiming jurisdiction over crimes that don't exist. By declaring mortals who defend themselves guilty of blood violation. By forcing mortal families into debt bonds that are just slavery with legal paperwork. His voice hardened. They're everything the blood laws were meant to prevent. Elara thought of Serafini, of the violence and casual cruelty. Can they really claim me for blood violation? I only defended myself. The law is murky on self-defense. Technically, you drew blood against a vampire on mortal territory without house sanction. Serafini will argue you should have submitted to her authority. The Night Court will have to rule on it. He looked at her directly. Which is why I bound you first. As my blood servant, you're under House Vross jurisdiction. Mordain can challenge the binding, but they can't simply execute you without due process. And if they challenge it, then we fight. In court first, with law and precedent. If that fails, he didn't finish the sentence, then we fight with blood. Yes. The firelight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles and inhuman beauty. Elara wondered what he'd looked like as a mortal man if his eyes had held warmth, if his smile had come easily, if he'd laughed without the weight of centuries dragging it down. The wound, she said softly. Is it really healing? Seelan lifted his shirt again, showing the gash across his ribs. The black lines were fading, the gray flesh regaining color. See for yourself. Your blood gave me what I needed to purge the poison. Then it was worth it. That's not. He stopped himself, seeming to realize that arguing would be pointless. You should rest, properly this time. Tomorrow night, we'll begin teaching you about the fortress, about house protocols. You need to understand how to survive here. Elara nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Seelan? He paused at the door. Yes? Thank you. For trusting me with the truth. Even the ugly parts. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Thank you for not running. Most people would have by now. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Elara touched her wrist where his fangs had pierced skin. The marks had vanished completely, leaving only smooth, unmarked flesh. But through the bond, she could still feel him moving through the fortress, checking on his remaining people, carrying the weight of House Vross on shoulders that had been bearing it for far too long. She lay back, pulling the blankets up to her chin, and let the bond's quiet hum lull her toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, new lessons in surviving the immortal world. But tonight, she'd given trust and received it in return. That felt like enough. Chapter 8. When shadows striketh, the attack came 3 nights later. At the darkest hour before dawn, Elara woke to the bond screaming danger, not words, but raw emotion flooding through the connection like ice water. Terror, rage, the metallic certainty of imminent death. She threw off the blankets and ran barefoot into the corridor, her heart hammering. Shouts echoed through the fortress, along with sounds she couldn't identify, crashes, inhuman snarls, something that might have been screaming. Thorn appeared from a side passage, moving with vampire speed. She grabbed Elara's arm hard enough to bruise. The tunnels. Now. What's happening? Mordain sent a strike force. 20 vampires, maybe more. Thorn dragged her toward a tapestry hanging on the far wall. They're inside the fortress. Seelan ordered me to get you out. I'm not leaving, you don't have a choice. Thorn ripped the tapestry down, revealing a narrow door. She produced a key from somewhere, hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. If you die, the binding breaks. Seelan can't afford that loss right now. He needs you alive. The door swung open onto darkness and the smell of damp earth. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew louder, closer. Thorn. A male voice, desperate. Marcus appeared at the end of the corridor, his shirt torn and soaked with black blood. East wing is breached. They're coming through the day chambers. Horror flashed across Thorn's face. The day chambers, where vampires slept their death sleep, vulnerable and helpless. How many of ours are still down there? Isla went to wake them, but Marcus's words cut off as a figure crashed through the window behind him. The Mordain vampire was massive, dressed in crimson and black, his face twisted with battle fury. He moved toward Marcus with terrifying speed, claws extended. Elara didn't think. She grabbed the iron candelabra from its stand and hurled it with all her strength. It struck the Mordain vampire in the chest, Not enough to truly hurt him, but enough to make him stumble, to turn his attention toward her. His eyes locked on Alara, and she saw recognition flash across his features. The blood servant. Serafini said you'd be here. He lunged. Marcus intercepted him mid-leap, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and fangs. Thorn shoved Alara toward the tunnel. Go, follow the left passages. There's an exit near the old mill. I can help your mortal. You'll die in seconds. Thorn's eyes had gone crimson, her fangs fully extended. Please, Alara, don't make me fail him. Don't make me watch another person he cares about die. The raw plea in her voice made Alara's protest die in her throat. She took one step toward the tunnel, then another. Behind her, Marcus screamed. Alara spun back in time to see the Mordain vampire tear his throat out. Black blood sprayed across the stone walls in arterial spurts. Marcus collapsed, his body already beginning to gray with true death, the kind vampires didn't wake from. No. Thorn's cry was pure anguish. She threw herself at the Mordain vampire with such fury that they crashed through the already broken window. Falling to stories to the courtyard below, Alara stood frozen, staring at Marcus's body. Dead, truly dead. One of the 6 who'd survived the first attack, gone in seconds. Now there were 5. Through the bond, she felt Seelan's presence spike with alarm. He'd felt Marcus die through whatever connection bound house members together. And he knew she was still in the fortress, still in danger. Run. The bond seemed to whisper, please run. But Alara's feet carried her forward instead, into the corridor where sounds of battle echoed. She had no weapons, no powers, no way to fight creatures that could move faster than her eyes could track. But she had something else. She had rage. Rage at Marcus's death. Rage at Serafini's attack 3 nights ago. Rage at a world where power meant everything and mercy meant nothing. She found Isla in the East Wing, surrounded by 3 Mordain vampires. The older woman fought like a demon, her movements precise and deadly despite the wounds covering her body. 2 enemy vampires lay dead at her feet, already dissolving into ash, but she was outnumbered and weakening. As Alara watched, one of the Mordain vampires drove a blade into Isla's side. She staggered, black blood streaming. The corridor had once been a dining hall. Broken furniture littered the floor, chairs, a shattered table, decorative pieces blown apart by vampire strength. Alara's eyes landed on a fallen candelabra, its base heavy iron. She grabbed it and charged. The Mordain vampire closest to her turned too late. Alara swung the iron base into his knee with every ounce of strength she possessed. Bones shattered with a sickening crack. The vampire howled and fell. Isla used the distraction. She moved like lightning, her blade finding the throat of another Mordain attacker. He dissolved to ash before he hit the ground, but the 3rd vampire, the one who'd stabbed Isla, grabbed Alara from behind. His arm locked around her throat, cutting off her air. Call them off, he snarled at Isla, or I kill the blood servant. Let's see how loyal House Ross is to mortal pets. Isla's eyes met Alara's across the space. In them, Alara saw calculation, the weighing of one life against many. And she saw the moment Isla made her choice. Release her, Isla said quietly. And I'll stand down. No, Alara choked out. The Mordain vampire laughed. Your master has made you soft, old woman. This is why House Ross fell. Too much sentiment. Not enough. Seelan appeared behind him like a shadow given form. One moment the corridor was empty except for the combatants. The next, Seelan stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't speak, didn't pause. His hand simply punched through the Mordain vampire's chest from behind, emerging on the other side with the creature's heart clutched in his fist. The vampire's eyes went wide. His grip on Alara released. Seelan withdrew his hand and let the body fall. It began dissolving to ash before it hit the stones. Isla, he said, his voice eerily calm. Status? East Wing secured. 5 Mordain dead. Marcus. Her voice cracked. Marcus is gone. Something rippled across Seelan's expression, grief, quickly locked down. And Thorn? Fighting in the courtyard. Last I saw, Seelan's eyes found Alara. Through the bond, she felt the war raging inside him, relief that she was alive, fury that she'd stayed and fought, terror at how close he'd come to losing her. You were supposed to run, he said quietly. Isla needed help. Isla is a 300-year-old vampire who survived a dozen wars. You're mortal, fragile, irreplaceable. He moved closer, his hand rising as if to touch her face, then stopping. If you died, but I didn't. Alara's voice shook. Marcus did. And he died buying time for me to escape. I wasn't going to waste that. The sound of running feet made them all turn. Thorn burst into the corridor, covered in black blood, some of it likely her own. They're retreating. 6 confirmed dead on their side, but they're pulling back to regroup. Then we've won, Isla said. No, Seelan's voice was flat. We've survived. There's a difference. He looked at each of them in turn. This was a test. Mordain wanted to see how we'd respond to a direct assault. How many of us remain? What weaknesses they could exploit? And what did they learn? Thorn asked. Seelan's eyes returned to Alara. That will protect our blood servant at any cost. That our numbers are diminished. And that we're desperate enough to let a mortal fight alongside us. She saved my life, Isla said firmly, which means they'll target her specifically next time. Seelan moved to the window, looking out at the lightening sky. Dawn was coming. We need to move. This fortress is compromised. We can't defend it against another assault. Move where? Thorn demanded. This is our home, our stronghold, our tomb. If we stay, Seelan turned back to them. Pack what you can carry. We leave tomorrow night, through the bond. Alara felt his despair, the weight of abandoning another piece of House Vross, of running again, of leading his people into uncertainty. She crossed the space and took his blood-covered hand in hers. He looked down at their joined hands, surprise flickering across his face. Then we'll survive somewhere else, Alara said quietly. Together. Chapter 9. Ashes and Embers. The Burn Marcus. At sunset, Alara stood beside Seelan in the ruined courtyard, watching flames consume what remained of the vampire who died protecting her escape. Vampire bodies didn't burn like mortal ones, they dissolved to ash quickly, almost eagerly, as if the fire simply accelerated their return to dust. He was 73 when he was turned, Seelan said quietly. A blacksmith's son from a village that doesn't exist anymore. He joined House Vross because we paid fairly and didn't treat mortals like cattle. His jaw tightened. He survived the massacre 7 years ago by sheer luck. He'd been out hunting when Victor opened the doors. He spent 3 days searching the ashes for survivors. Isla stood on Seelan's other side, her wounded shoulder bandaged but healing. Thorn was somewhere behind them, preparing the horses and wagons for their departure. Only the 4 of them remained now. 4 vampires and 1 mortal, fleeing into the night. He deserved better than this, Isla murmured. They all did. Seelan's voice was hollow. Every member of House Vross who died deserved better than betrayal and slaughter. And this, he gestured at the burning pyre. This wasteful, stupid, endless war. Alara wanted to offer comfort, but couldn't find words adequate to the grief radiating through the bond. Instead, she simply moved closer, her shoulder touching his arm. After a moment, his hand found hers. They stood together in silence until the flames died and only ash remained. We should go, Isla said finally. Before Mordain sends reinforcements. The fortress looked different in the dying light, not imposing or grand, but simply broken. 7 years of decay and violence had reduced it to a shell, and now they were abandoning even that. Alara had only lived here 3 days, but something in her chest ached at leaving. This place had been sanctuary, however brief. Thorn had the wagon ready in the stable yard. 2 horses stood in harness, their breath misting in the cold air. The wagon bed held trunks and bundles, everything they could salvage. Books, weapons, clothes, the precious stores of preserved blood that meant survival. Where are we going? Alara asked, as Seelan helped her into the wagon. North. There's an old watchtower in the Thornwood abandoned for decades, but the structure is sound. It's not much, but it's defensible. He swung up beside her, taking the reins. We'll rest there while we plan our next move. Isla and Thorn mounted horses, flanking the wagon like guards. In the fading light, they looked like specters, pale and beautiful and utterly inhuman. The wagon lurched into motion. Alara watched the fortress recede behind them, its broken towers silhouetted against the darkening sky. She thought of Marcus dying in the corridor, of Serafini crashing through the window, of the binding ceremony that had changed everything. 3 days. Her entire world had transformed in 3 days. You're thinking too loud, Seelan said softly. I can feel it through the bond. Sorry. I don't know how to quiet my mind yet. Don't apologize. I'm the one intruding on your thoughts. He guided the horses onto a narrow forest path, branches closing overhead. Though if you wanted to share what's troubling you, I'd listen. Alara pulled her cloak tighter against the cold. I'm thinking about how quickly everything changes. 3 days ago I was in my father's house, wearing my worst dress, expecting to be sold to some lord for debt payment. Now I'm fleeing through the forest with vampires, bound by blood magic, wanted for execution by a house I'd never heard of. Regret? Surprisingly, no, she looked at him in the dimness. I should regret it. Any sensible person would. But this running, fighting, mattering even in some small way, it feels more real than anything in my old life. Seelan's expression was unreadable. Mattering gets people killed. Marcus mattered. He died for it. And if he hadn't mattered? If he'd lived as nothing, meant nothing, protected nothing? Alara shook her head. That's not living. That's just waiting to die. Spoken like someone who's never watched centuries of people they love turn to dust, but there was no heat in his words. Only bone-deep weariness. They traveled in silence for a while, the wagon creaking over uneven ground. Alara could hear Isla and Thorn conferring quietly behind them, their vampire voices carrying in the still air. Tell me about her, Alara said suddenly. Your wife, the one who went mad from the bond. Seelan's hands tightened on the reins. Why? Because you're afraid of what happened with her happening with me. I can feel it through the bond, this constant worry, this waiting for me to break. She turned to face him. So tell me about her. Let me understand what you're afraid of. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, her name was Catherine. She was a healer in the village near our estate. I was already turned when I met her 50 years into immortality and still learning to control the hunger. She tended my wounds after a border skirmish. And she saw past what I was, saw the person I'd been, the person I was trying to remain. You loved her, desperately, completely, the way you love when you're young and stupid and think love can conquer everything. His voice went distant. I turned her because she was dying of fever. She begged me to save her, and I couldn't bear to lose her. But the transformation, it broke something in her mind. She became obsessed with me, couldn't stand to be apart even for hours. The bond amplified everything she felt until there was no room for anything else. How long? 53 years. For 53 years I watched her deteriorate, watched the woman I loved disappear into madness. When she finally walked into sunlight, I felt relief more than grief. And I've hated myself for that ever since. The confession hung between them, raw and terrible. Alara reached out, covering his hand with hers on the reins. I'm not her, she said firmly. I'm not fragile or obsessed, or waiting to break. I'm angry and stubborn and too practical for my own good. The bond scares me sometimes, yes, but it doesn't control me. Not yet, not ever. She squeezed his hand. I make my own choices, Seelan. I chose to stay and fight when I could have run. I chose to offer you my blood when you were wounded. I choose to be here now, in this wagon, fleeing into darkness with you. Give me credit for having agency in my own life. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression cracked open. You're remarkable. Do you know that? I'm terrified and making it up as I go. Yes, that's what makes you remarkable. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, formal, old-fashioned, utterly disarming. Thank you for trusting me with your choices. Heat rushed to Alara's cheeks. Before she could respond, Thorn called from behind them. Riders, east side. 3 of them. Seelan's demeanor changed instantly, going from gentle to predatory in a heartbeat. Mordain. Can't tell yet, but they're tracking us. How far? Half a mile. Closing fast. Seelan urged the horses to greater speed. The wagon jolted over roots and stones, throwing Alara against his side. He steadied her with one arm, while managing the reins with the other. Can we outrun them? Alara asked, not with the wagon weighing us down. His expression hardened. But we can make them regret following us. Isla, already on it. Isla wheeled her horse around, drawing a wicked-looking blade from her saddle. Thorn joined her, and together they disappeared back down the path. Seelan drove the wagon off the main trail, into thicker forest where branches scraped against the sides. After several tense minutes, he pulled the horses to a stop in a small clearing. What are we hiding? If Isla and Thorn can lead them astray, we might avoid another fight. He helped Alara down from the wagon, then began unhitching the horses. But if not, I need you to promise me something. What? If fighting starts, you take a horse and you ride north. Don't stop. Don't look back. The watchtower is marked on the old maps. Follow the North Star until you reach Thornwood, then look for the ruins. I'm not leaving you, Alara. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. I can't protect you and fight effectively. If they catch us, you become a liability. Please, for once, just run, through the bond, She felt his desperation and beneath it, something else. Fear not for himself, but for her. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could help. But she'd seen what vampires could do when they fought, and she knew her limitations. If it comes to that, she said quietly, I'll run. Relief flooded through the bond. Thank you. In the distance, they heard sounds that might have been fighting or might have been wind through trees. Seelan's hand found hers in the darkness, and they waited. Chapter 10. The choice between shadows and light. The watchtower rose from the thornwood like a broken finger pointing at the stars. They'd arrived 3 hours before dawn. Exhausted and bloodied, but alive. Isla and Thorn had returned with wounds, but Victory, the 3 Mordain trackers, were ash scattered across the forest floor. The cost showed in their faces, in the way Thorn favored her left side, and Isla moved with careful precision around cracked ribs. The tower was exactly as Seelan had described, ancient, half-ruined, but structurally sound. 3 stories of weathered stone with arrow slits for windows and a single heavy door that looked like it could withstand a siege. Inside, dust coated everything, and birds had nested in the rafters. But the walls were thick, the underground chamber was intact, and there was a well with clean water. It would do. Alara helped unload the wagon while the vampires secured the perimeter. Her muscles ached from hours of travel, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. But there was work to be done, supplies to organize, sleeping quarters to prepare, defenses to establish. By the time the sky began to lighten, they'd transformed chaos into something resembling order. The vampires retreated to the underground chamber, where no sunlight could penetrate. Alara was left alone in the tower's main room with a pile of blankets, a lantern, and instructions to bar the door and sleep. She tried. Lay down on the makeshift bed they'd assembled for her, closed her eyes, willed herself to rest, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Through the bond, she could feel Seelan below her, feel him settling into death sleep as dawn broke. The sensation was disturbing and intimate all at once, like watching someone die, knowing they'd wake again at sunset. His presence dimmed, but didn't disappear entirely. Leaving a hollow ache where his consciousness had been, Alara gave up on sleep and explored instead. The tower had belonged to House Vross once, generations ago, before the fortress became their primary stronghold. Evidence remained in the carved symbols above doorways and the faded crest on one wall, a raven clutching a broken crown. Someone had lived here, fought here, perhaps died here. Now it would shelter them again. She climbed to the second floor, where arrow slits offered views of the surrounding forest. Dawn painted the thornwood in shades of gold and amber, beautiful and vast, and utterly indifferent to vampire wars and mortal fears. Alara pressed her forehead against the cold stone, letting the chill ground her. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered to the empty room, to herself, to whatever god might listen to a woman bound to the undead. I don't know how to survive this world, how to help them, how to be what Seelan needs me to be. The bond offered no answers, just that persistent hollow where his presence should have been. A sound from below made her freeze, footsteps on the stairs, deliberate and unhurried. But the vampires were in death sleep. They couldn't wake until sunset, unless Alara grabbed a piece of broken timber from the floor, heart hammering. The footsteps grew closer. She raised the improvised weapon, ready to easy. Isla emerged from the stairwell, hands raised peacefully. Just me. Alara lowered the timber, confusion replacing fear. You should be sleeping. The sun is up. I'm old enough to resist a sleep for a few hours if needed. It's exhausting, and I'll pay for it later, but it's possible. Isla moved to the window, keeping carefully to the shadows. Even indirect sunlight could harm a vampire. I wanted to talk to you. Away from Seelan and the bond. About what? About what happens next. Isla turned to face her, and in the morning light her scars looked deeper, more pronounced. House Mordain won't stop hunting us. They'll send more soldiers, better equipped. They'll track us here eventually, and when they do, we'll have to run again. Or make a stand. We can't win. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you've gotten yourself into? Isla's voice was gentle but firm. This isn't a romantic story where love conquers all, and the underdog wins through pluck and determination. This is war. Brutal, grinding war against an enemy with resources we can't match. We're 4 vampires and 1 mortal against an entire house. The smart thing, the sane thing would be to negotiate. Offer Mordain what they want in exchange for peace. Alara's throat tightened. What do they want? Seelan's death, or his complete submission, which would be death by another name? Isla's expression was unreadable. They want House Ross erased from history. No survivors, no legacy, no threat to their power. And we're the last obstacle to that goal. So we fight, so we die. Slowly, running and hiding and watching our number dwindle until there's nothing left, Isla stepped closer. Unless we give them an alternative. Unless we offer them something they want more than revenge. Understanding crashed through Alara like ice water. Me. You want to give them? Me. Not give. Trade. You're wanted for blood violation. That's the legal pretext they're using for all of this. If we handed you over for trial, claimed we'd been coerced into protecting you, Mordain might accept that. Might let us disappear into obscurity rather than hunting us to extinction. The betrayal cut deeper than it should have. Alara had known these people for days, not years. She shouldn't feel wounded by the suggestion. But the bond made it personal, made it hurt. Does Seelan know you're suggesting this? Absolutely not. He'd tear my head off for even thinking it. Isla's voice softened. Which is exactly why I'm talking to you. Because Seelan won't make the rational choice. He'll protect you at any cost, even if that cost is everyone he has left. Even if it destroys him. And you think I should make the choice for him? Sacrifice myself to save House Ross? I think you should know all your options. Know what your presence costs us. Isla moved back toward the stairs. Seelan cares about you. More than is wise. More than is safe. I can see it in how he looks at you. How the bond affects him. If you died, it would break something in him. But if we all die because he refused to let you go, that would destroy him completely. Alara sank onto the floor, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Why are you telling me this? Because someone has to. Because you deserve honesty, even when it's cruel. Isla paused at the top of the stairs. Think about it. Really think about what kind of future we're offering you here. What kind of life. And ask yourself if it's worth the blood it will cost. Then she was gone, descending back into darkness. Alara sat in the morning light, turning Isla's words over in her mind. The tower was silent except for wind whistling through arrow slits and the distant call of birds. Below, Seelan slept his death sleep, unaware of the conversation. Unaware that his second-in-command had just offered Alara an escape in the form of martyrdom. She touched her wrist where his fangs had pierced her. The marks were long healed, but she could still remember the sensation, pain transforming to connection, the overwhelming intimacy of the bond flaring open. Would he really let everyone die to protect her? The answer came through the bond itself, a certainty that lived in the connection between them. Yes, without hesitation, without regret, Alara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the forest stretching endlessly in all directions. She thought of her father's house, of the life she'd left behind, of being sold like property, valued only for bloodline and dowry. Here, at least, she was valued for herself. Here she mattered. But what if mattering meant everyone she cared about died? The sun climbed higher, and still no answers came. Chapter 11. Lessons in Darkness. Galen woke at sunset to find Alara sitting beside his chamber. A book open in her lap and shadows under her eyes. You didn't sleep, he said, rising from the stone slab that served as his day bed. The underground chamber was sparse just for slabs, some storage trunks, and a single lantern burning low. I tried. Alara closed the book. My mind wouldn't cooperate. Through the bond, he felt the turbulence underneath her calm exterior, confusion, fear, something that tasted like grief. He moved closer, crouching before her chair. What happened? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. She looked at him, and he saw exhaustion written in every line of her face. Tell me honestly, if it came down to choosing between my life and theirs. She gestured toward where Isla and Thorn still slept. What would you do? The question struck like a blade between ribs. Seelan stood, pacing the small chamber. That's not a choice I'll ever have to make. But if you did? Alara, answer me, please. He stopped, facing away from her because he couldn't bear to see her expression when he spoke the truth. I would choose you. Every time. Without hesitation. Silence. Then quietly, even if it meant their deaths? Even if it meant House Ross ending completely? Yes. Why? The word broke on something that might have been tears. Why am I worth more than everything you've spent centuries building? Seelan turned then, and damned the consequences. Because they are my responsibility, my duty, my house. But you, he crossed the space between them, kneeling again so their eyes were level. You are the first person in 300 years who looked at me and saw someone worth saving. Not a monster to fear, not a lord to obey, not a weapon to deploy, just someone. And I cannot watch that light go out of the world. I won't. Alara's hand rose to his cheek, her touch warm against his cold skin. That's the most terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for honesty. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. But Seelan, what you're describing, that kind of devotion, it's not sustainable. It's not healthy. It will destroy you. Then let it. His hands found her waist, steadying himself as much as her. I've survived wars, plagues, the death of everyone I once loved. I've endured centuries of loneliness and violence and endless, grinding duty. If caring about you destroys me, at least I'll have felt something real before the end. Through the bond, emotions crashed between them, his desperate sincerity meeting her terrified tenderness. For a moment they simply breathed together, existing in the space where immortal and mortal met. Then Isla's voice cut through the moment. How touching. Are we interrupting? Seelan pulled back, composing himself with visible effort. Isla and Thorn stood at the chamber entrance, both fully awake and watching with unreadable expressions. We need to talk strategy, Isla said. All of us. Mordain knows we're in Thornwood. It's only a matter of time before they find this tower. They gathered in the main room upstairs, where Alara had laid out the supplies. Thorn built a fire while Seelan spread a map across the floor, hand-drawn, centuries old, showing territories that no longer existed under their original names. Here, Seelan pointed to a mark in the northern mountains. The Ashen Court, neutral ground where the Night Council convenes to settle disputes between houses. You want to petition the council? Thorn's voice was skeptical. They're corrupt, bought by Mordain gold. They won't rule in our favor. Not petition. Demand formal arbitration under the Treaty of Ashen Gates. Seelan's finger traced a route north. If we can prove Mordain violated treaty law by attacking Alara without due process, the council has to intervene. They may be corrupt, but they won't openly violate their own founding principles. It would undermine their authority. And if they refuse? Isla asked. Then we have our answer. The blood laws mean nothing. The old ways are dead, and we're fighting a war with no rules. His jaw tightened. But at least we'll know. Alara studied the map, noting the distance. How long would it take to reach the Ashen Court? 3 weeks of hard travel, through territories controlled by houses who may or may not honor our safe passage. Seelan looked at her. It's dangerous. More dangerous than staying here. Staying here is a slow death, Alara countered. At least traveling gives us a chance. She's right, Thorn said. We can't defend this tower indefinitely. We're outnumbered, out-resourced, and running out of blood stores. If we're going to make a move, it should be now, while we still have strength. Isla remained silent, her expression troubled. Finally, she said, the Ashen Court hasn't convened in 7 years. Not since House Vross fell and Mordain claimed our territories. What makes you think they'll even hear us? Because I'm invoking blood, right? Seelan's voice went cold. As the last legitimate heir of House Vross, I have the right to demand arbitration for crimes against my house. They can ignore petitions. They cannot ignore blood, right, without declaring the entire council structure invalid. Understanding dawned on Isla's face. You're forcing their hand, making them choose between upholding the old laws or admitting those laws are dead. Exactly. It's brilliant, Thorn murmured. Or suicidal. Possibly both. It's our only play. Seelan began rolling up the map. We leave tomorrow night. Pack light, weapons only, essential supplies. The journey will be hard. Over the next hours they prepared. Alara watched the vampires move with practiced efficiency, checking weapons, rationing blood stores, making contingency plans for scenarios she didn't want to imagine. They'd done this before, she realized. Fled and fought and survived against impossible odds. As midnight approached, Seelan found her on the tower's second floor, staring out at the forest. You should rest, he said softly. Tomorrow will be difficult. I don't think I can sleep. My mind keeps spinning. She turned to face him. Teach me something. About your world, your rules. Help me understand what we're walking into. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Lesson 1. Vampire hierarchy is absolute. Age equals power equals authority. When we reach the Ashen Court, you'll see vampires who make me look young. They were ancient when I was born. Show them respect, even if they don't deserve it. And if they try to hurt me, they won't. You're under my protection as blood servant. Harming you is equivalent to attacking me directly. His expression darkened. Though they may test those boundaries, try to provoke me into breaking protocol. Don't let them bait you. What else? Never accept food or drink from a vampire you don't trust. Never agree to anything without understanding the exact terms. And never, ever let them separate you from me at the court. Some of the older ones view mortals as amusing pets at best, disposable resources at worst. Alara felt ice settle in her stomach. You're making this sound worse by the minute. I'm being honest. The Ashen Court is not a safe place for mortals or diminished houses. We'll be walking into a nest of predators who view us as weak and prey. He moved closer. But we'll also be invoking laws older than most of them. Laws they cannot break without consequences. And if the laws aren't enough, then we fight our way out and find another solution. His hand found hers. But whatever happens, I need you to promise me something. What? If I tell you to run, you run. No heroics. No staying to fight. You take the fastest horse and you ride until you reach mortal lands. You find a new life far from vampire politics. I'm not abandoning you, promise me, Alara. His grip tightened. I can face anything except knowing you died because I failed to protect you. She wanted to argue. Wanted to insist they'd survive together or not at all. But the desperate plea in his eyes, the fear bleeding through the bond made her hesitate. I promise, she whispered. If it comes to that, I'll run. Relief flooded through him. He pulled her into an embrace that felt like drowning and salvation all at once. Thank you. They stood together in the darkness, holding on to each other like anchors in a storm. Outside, the thornwood whispered secrets to the night, and somewhere beyond the trees, enemies gathered, and the Ashen Court waited. Tomorrow, they would begin the journey north. Tonight, they had this moment of fragile peace. Alara breathed in the scent of him, cold winter flowers and old parchment, and something uniquely Seelan. Whatever happens, she murmured against his chest, I don't regret this. Any of it. His arms tightened. Neither do I, and through the bond, she felt the truth of it, his certainty that whatever doom awaited them, having known her made it worthwhile.